Okay, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Northern Kentucky History Hour. I'm your host for tonight, Heather Cook. Northern Kentucky History Hour is a project of the Behringer-Crawford Museum, Northern Kentucky's History Museum. Behringer-Crawford Museum is supported in part by the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, Kentucky Arts Council, the Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, the Carol Ann and Ralph B. Hale Jr. U.S. Bank Foundation, and our members. If you're not yet a member of the museum, please consider joining us for access to discounts and exclusive programming. You can learn more at our website, bcmuseum.org. I would highly suggest you can become a member of our museum. Besides getting all of the benefits of being a member, you also join a really great community that we have here. So before we begin, we're going to go over a few reminders. Everyone's microphone was muted when they were admitted, and that is so that everybody can focus on the presentation. Please feel free to turn on your video if you would like, but just so you know, others are able to see you even if the screen is being shared. If you have a question or a comment to share, please put it in the chat, and we will try to get as many questions as possible immediately following the presentation. There will also be a trivia question tonight. The first respondent to correctly answer it in the chat will win a Northern Kentucky History Hour pin. So let's meet tonight's speaker. Kim Gehring-Cook has been the education director at the Behringer-Crawford Museum for the past 5.5 years. Prior to that, she was the reading and art teacher at Covington Latin School for 18 years. She has also been a Girl Scout leader for her 2 daughters and worked for Creative Glass at Kings Island for over 17 years, several of those years as a glass blower. Kim has a bachelor's in art and in English, as well as a master's in secondary education. Kim, welcome.
Hi, thanks everyone. Well, until I was at Behringer-Crawford Museum, I didn't even realize that Covington has her very own artist, Mary Bruce Sharon. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Mary Bruce Sharon, her connections with Covington, and the early history of the city. The museum has 12 of the Mary Bruce Sharon paintings. It was with the help of Virginia Kirst. The paintings were purchased from the Carnegie, donated to the museum by Oakley and Eva G. Ferris. They were purchased from the Carnegie because it was not a collecting organization. And we really wanted to make sure that some of her work stayed right here in Covington, and you'll see why. But we just wanted to let you know where we got our collection. And like I said, we have 12 of her paintings. Currently, 4 of them are on view right now on the 4th floor of the museum. We do rotate them out. As I'll talk about her work, a lot of her paint was using gouache, which does excellent color, but it does fade in light. So we can't have them all out all the time just for preservation purposes. So let's get started and find out a little bit more about Mary Bruce Sharon. Let me pull up my screen share. Okay. All right. So Mary Bruce Sharon is sometimes referred to as the Grandma Moses or Grandma Sharon, if you will, of Covington. And I like to talk about her works as being called the painted memories, because that was her theme. She painted her childhood memories, and she also painted the stories that her mother told her about her mother's childhood. So we can learn a lot about the early life in Covington, especially of a very well-to-do family during the 1800s. Okay, so let me move this. So Mary Bruce Sharon has a particular style often called primitive. It's very childlike in nature. It's a type of folk art. She is most closely related to, in style, to Grandma Moses. So it's a very pure, innocent, childlike type of art. And it's also sometimes known as naive art. It's a very, very simple technique. As you see on these pieces, like the one here of the still lifes with the table, all of her pictures are very flat. It's almost as if you're looking down at the table. And it's much like a young child would paint or draw something, because they don't yet quite get that three-dimensional appearance. But also Cezanne even used this style on some of his still lifes, because what they wanted you to do is look down and see all the details of what was on that table or whatever the piece was. So in the bottom picture, Grandma's black table is actually on display currently on the 4th floor in Behringer-Crawford Museum. And you can really see that flat approach with the picture frames and the portrait there. So we get this timeless glimpse through what Mary Bruce Sharon remembers of her childhood. All right. I love learning about the styles of the day, what the interior design looks like, or the clothing fashions through the eyes of her paintings, because she's painting from what she remembers. Now, Mary Bruce was born Mary Bruce Green in 1870. Actually, she was born in 1877. I'm sorry, I just noticed that. She was born in 1877 in Kansas City, Missouri. Her father died in 1878, so she was only a year old. So when Mary Bruce's father died, her mother moved in with her father, Colonel Henry Bruce Jr. And at the time they were in Kansas City at the, make sure I have this word right, the St. James Hotel, which he ran. He was an incredible businessman. And we'll be hearing a lot about Colonel Bruce because he really influenced her artwork. Now, after living there for a few years, probably when Mary Bruce was about 4 or 5 years old, they decided to move back to Covington. Colonel Bruce had lived there as well as several other cities and kept homes in all of these places. Like I said, he was very wealthy. And they decided to move back to Covington. And they moved to the house on a street right down in Covington called Sandford Street. And the address was 622 Sandford Street. And you might know it as the rugby school now. That was actually the location where Colonel Bruce was living when he brought John Roebling to Covington to design the bridge. And I'll talk more about that in the future. So down here we have a picture of Mary Bruce with her grandfather, Colonel Henry Bruce, sitting at the river fishing. You can see the horse, the buggy, hillside. To her, her grandfather was really the only father figure that she knew, being only a year old when her father died. And her mother never remarried. So Grandpa really was that influence in her life. Over to the side here, we see a picture of Mary Bruce with her paints. And one reason, I mentioned that her greatest artistic association was with Grandma Moses. Well, just like Grandma Moses, Mary Bruce was 71 years old before she started her painting career. So it's never too late to do what you really want to do and to go after that dream. So, yeah, she ended up painting. Well, let me go back here. She ended up painting for several years. And I'll go more into that later. what I wanted to tell you now really was that, she's painting these memories of when she's a child. So she's born in 1877. And so we're talking the 1880s would be a good time period for a lot of her pieces to take place in, unless they're depicting something earlier that was from a story her mother had told her. So I thought I would take just a moment to show you a little bit of what some of the prices and things were in Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky area in the 1880s. So if you were a day laborer and you worked a 10-hour day, which would not be unheard of, you would make $1.50 for your day's work. That's 15 cents an hour. Yeah. So if you figure that there are 312 days of work days in the year, counting for Sundays and Christmases where you wouldn't get paid because you wouldn't be working those days, you would make a grand total of $468 that year. Now, hopefully prices weren't as bad as they are today if that's all you're making. So if you look at it, pork was only 10 to 15 cents a pound, cheese 8 cents a pound, potatoes 10 cents a bushel, roast beef was 5.5 cents a pound, steak was 9 cents a pound, sugar and coffee 7 cents a pound, coal was $3.18 a ton. So, we think, oh, wow, the prices were so great back then. Well, they kind of had to be if you're only going to make under $500 a year for your salary. Now, some jobs like being a railroad conductor or blacksmith, you make considerably more. You might make $3.65 or $2.50 a day instead. So, yeah, big difference to today's economy, to say the least. To rent a room, a 4-room house was $10 a month. A 6-room house was $15 a month. But, comparatively, that is, pretty expensive. Now, Colonel Henry Bruce, I've already said that he was very wealthy. Well, he made his fortune in lots of different ways. Like I said, he was an incredible businessman, but he wasn't afraid to work hard. He first started doing hog drives and trading with and doing these trips with his father's company. Covington had lots of farms, lots of pigs on the farms, and they would drive the pigs across the river into Cincinnati, where we got the name Porkopolis because of all the butcher shops. He also was with one of the foundries of Covington. He was the president of the Covington Cincinnati Bridge Company. And he was one of the main people who, as I mentioned, brought John Roebling here to build the bridge. And after the Civil War, he owned hotels and other financial institutions. So he was quite the businessman. Now, knowing the price of food, okay.
You're muted.
There we go. Am I unmuted now? Okay. So he made considerably more than a day laborer would. We'll just say that. Now, on these pictures, when I have dates in parentheses by the titles, those are the dates that the pictures are supposed to depict from Mary Bruce's memory. So here, this piece is entitled Christmas Dinner. We do have this piece at Behringer-Crawford. It's currently not on view at this time, but we may be switching some of them out soon. And these are her words. The high point of the year. There was so much excitement, so many presents, such delicious food, so much fond relatives. Sometimes there would be as many as 50 of the Bruce cousins to help celebrate. But Grandpa told me he loved me best. He was the only father I ever really knew. And she states later on in her book, a children's book that she wrote, which I always forget the name. It's called Scenes from a Childhood. She says, dinner was usually in the middle of the day. Roast turkey, stuffed goose, ham aged in Grandpa's smokehouse, hot rolls, hot biscuits, sweet potatoes, white potatoes, preserves and jellies, and of course, mint pies, sweet potato pies, white and dark fruit cakes, all kinds of other delectable desserts, nuts and raisins, and brandy for the gentlemen. So we get a look at what kind of a feast they would really have for Christmas dinner if you were a wealthy family in Covington in the mid 1880s. You can, if you look closely at the picture, we see this beautiful Christmas tree with the candles lit on it, you know, fire in the hearth. We see punch out, we see portraits on the wall, fancy wallpaper, details in the rugs and in the women's clothing. It's just amazing what we can see when we look at this and get a feel for what that time period was like. At this time, they would have had servants that took care of most of the jobs in the house. Now, one thing that I do need to mention, that Colonel Henry Bruce was a Confederate sympathizer, and that does play into some of her pieces. And he did own slaves at one point. By the point when Mary Bruce would have been alive, the Civil War would have been over, and at this point, they would have been family servants. Here is a piece called Grandpa's Kitchen. She talks about, you know, how she was able to learn from the cook and actually be taught how to cook, and that the cook should be ready to prepare for as many as 12 unexpected guests at any meal. That is a lot of extra food. So that just goes to show you how wealthy Colonel Bruce really was. I have a photo down here of Mary Bruce Sharon as a young girl with her doll in her doll carriage. And she took her little, her doll with her everywhere. I believe her doll's name was Mary Katherine. And we'll talk more about her later. She has clothing made to match. And that was her precious doll. That was her favorite toy. And you will see that show up in many, many of her paintings. But again, here we see what the kitchen looked like, the type of stove that was used at the time. So it gives us that glimpse into Covington history. Here is a picture of Colonel Henry Bruce. He was one of the founders of the Covington and Cincinnati Bridge Company, as well as his president at one point in time. John Roebling actually lived with him for 6 months on Sandford Street while he was designing the suspension bridge that bears his name. And that was, you know, before Mary Bruce. And then, of course, the war breaks out. President Lincoln did not want the bridge finished. He thought it was too easy for the Confederate soldiers to be able to get into Cincinnati. So the bridge was made to be put on hold. And then just a little bit about some of the early siege that never occurred in Cincinnati was that the Covington and the Cincinnati troops wanted to work together. So they ended up making a pontoon boat that went across the river, tying the boats together so that they could work with one another and do drills together. Well, when the war was over, everyone's like, wow, that was incredible. We've got to get this bridge finished. Well, at that point, Colonel Bruce isn't really in the picture anymore. because as you see in this picture, now this would have been a memory that Mary Bruce Sharon paints of a story that her mother told to her about Grandpa's escape. See, Colonel Bruce was a Confederate sympathizer, and the theory or the story or legend is that he supplied gold to use as the bribe to get John Hunt Morgan out of the Columbus jail. There's different stories as to how that actually happened, but that is the story. And in this painting, there is, we see a fleeing Colonel Bruce on a gray horse as the Union troops are marching down the sidewalk towards his house to arrest him. And there are some ghost stories that go along with this tale to this day, but of a ghostly horse and rider, a gray horse and rider that's seen at night going through the rooms, that it said that that could be Colonel Henry Bruce. But that's a whole nother story. You need to look back at last week's if you didn't see it. So anyway, he did flee the country. He's said to have crossed over into Ohio. I have heard that that was Anderson Ferry. And he eventually made his way up to Canada, and he hid in Canada until the end of the Civil War. So, you know, he's not running his company at this point. Okay. So here is his home at 622 Sandford Street. There's a letter by Colonel Henry Bruce that indicates that John Roebling arrived in Covington on August 28th, 1856. And that is the house that he stayed in. There's a picture of it today down in the bottom. And I did over on the right side here have some where the building is, and then also some of the streets. We've got Green Up and Garrett and Sandford Street, so that you can see 7th crossing over there. So if you ever want to check out the house, it's down by the Riverside Drive area of Covington, off by the point. You, like I said, you might know the house as being the rugby home. It was later turned into that. Originally, this house was an academy for women, and Colonel Bruce had bought it from that group. Here's just a picture of John Roebling in the center. We've got the day that the Cincinnati Covington Bridge opened on December 1st of 1866. And then a worker guy sitting there holding on to the railing. Then we've got the pictures of the suspension bridge in 1870. So much the way it would look right around the time when Mary Bruce Sharon was young. It would have been very similar. Notice the steamboats on the river. And that was one thing. When they were proposing a bridge to go across the Ohio River, the steamboat companies were not happy about that, because it would be, there would have to be so many different towers within the water to support the bridge that the steamboats would not be able to go up and down the river. And that was their livelihood. And that was the main center that made Cincinnati what it was. So when John Roebling came up with this idea of a suspension bridge and only needing the 2 towers leaving the center area open, that's when the steamboat companies got on board with it. And they were like, well, yeah, if we can still, you know, traffic our boats through, let's go for it. So it wasn't until then that they were able to go forward with that. So this painting here is called Over the Rhine on Grandpa's Bridge. The Ohio was often called the Rhine. And here there's a story that I believe Mary Bruce Sharon's mother told Mary Bruce that when they were little, the daughters, Colonel Bruce's daughters, went to school in Cincinnati, and they would have to take a long, cold ferry ride every day back and forth the Ohio River to get to school. Well, in the wintertime, it was really cold. So the little story goes that they said, Papa, Papa, build us a bridge. And so he did. And that's why he brought in John Roebling to build the suspension bridge. So it's kind of a cute story. Be nice if it was real. So, all right. But again, we see Mary Bruce's style of looking down into the boat, looking at each area so that you can really see the details of the home, the very small steamboat compared to this person rowing a boat across here. So to her, it's not really important to show perspective and have everything be precise and photorealistic, because that's not what she was going for. She's painting her memories. She's trying to get those details down. She wants you to see everything like she saw it, but the photographic realism was not necessary. Here's some more pictures of Covington in the 1880s, as Mary would have seen it. There's a picture of her at the top as a very little girl. We've got some shoe stores, the Geta factory building from the 1880s. It was originally built as part of the Bavarian Brewing Company. We've got some churches and just some of the other buildings around. It's just kind of fun to see what would she have seen while she was here. Here's a portrait of the fire department. Another one of the very wealthy family homes. And of course, Ludlow Lagoon. I'm not sure if she was still in Covington when Ludlow Lagoon opened or not. But if she was, it would have been opened in 1894. Okay. Whoops. And just minutes away, we had this Cincinnati was really one of the up and coming cities at the time. So Covington, by default, being so close, shared in that growth. Industrial, political, literary, education, arts, everything. It was huge. Cincinnati was one of the largest cities in Ohio. Well, it was the largest city in Ohio, and it was something like the 5th largest in the country at that time. It had almost 300,000 people. That was the densest population of any city in the US at this time. The major industry was iron production, meat packing, cloth production, and woodworking. And you're going to have a lot of that industry starting in the early time of Covington specifically. There were more than 15 railroads connected to Cincinnati and to other parts of the United States. Now, that's kind of where the downfall comes, though. Cincinnati was a little late in picking up the railroad because they were so set on the popularity of the steamboats that they kind of overlooked the railroad, and some of the other cities picked up on it, and that's where those cities like New York and such, kind of in Chicago, took over. But there were 130 newspapers and magazines in Cincinnati in 1890. That just boggles my mind. The public library had more than 80,000 books. You know, we had the art museum, the art academy, the opera house, music hall, and the exposition building. I mean, this area was big time, really, as Mary Bruce was growing up. Now, after so many years, I cannot find the exact years, but as Mary Bruce starts getting a little bit older, she and her mother decide that they're going to return back to Kansas City, Missouri, where Mary was born. And Mary Mary eventually meets and marries Frederick Christie Sharon around the year 1900. And that's as close as I can pinpoint it without actually getting into their records. Everything just says around 1900. They remained in Kansas City together as husband and wife with one child until 1939. And they relocated east. They spent time in New York City and Connecticut. So she kind of lived all over through these different areas and traveled quite a bit. Now, her husband died in 1949. So she moves this time to live with her only daughter, Henrietta, named after her mother, by the way, Mary Bruce's mother, Henrietta Bruce Sharon Ahmed. And it was Henrietta's husband, so Mary Bruce's son-in-law, who was one of the greatest influences in her becoming a painter so late in life. Her son-in-law, Carol Ahmed, was an abstract painter, and he started to see some of the illustrations that Mary Bruce had done for her children's book. And he went out and bought her some paints and brushes and canvases. And he says, you ought to do this. You're great. This is wonderful. What's keeping you from painting? Go for it. And so she did. And she started painting when she was 71 years old. That was about from about 1948 to 1961, she produced 150 unique pieces of artwork depicting scenes from her life and childhood in Northern Kentucky. So she really gives us a look at what it was like here in those late 1880s. She paints these memories, and some of them are just like classic memories. Sitting in a sleigh, being in the snow with horses, and there's even one that has snowmen in it. So it's really fun to see, hey, look, they did the same type of stuff that we do today sometimes. This portrait up here that says 1898 is a portrait of Mary Bruce as a young woman. Okay. And this piece is very fun. We have the photo and then the painting that she did that copies the photo. So you can see she's pretty accurate in her details. This one she just entitles Myself, 1882. And what's fun is that she says, I remember this outfit that I'm wearing very well. The dress was embroidered and Mama had it made for me in New York. My bonnet came from Paris. My spring-heeled shoes were new, and so was my parasol. I still have the little blue heart I was wearing. Cute little necklace there. The Roman sash completed my costume, which even then, at 4 or 5, or whatever I was, I thought was very chic. So even at 4 or 5 years old, she had this great sense of style. But again, she's a child describing, what it's like to be from a very wealthy family, quite obviously. And she talks about how her dolls are going to have the same clothes that match, that are made by hand as well. So she's not wanting for anything. That her grandfather really, really spoiled her. Here is another picture, and a lot of these are from her book. This one's called All the Transportation in My Childhood, 1885. So she talks about how she loves to travel. There's a picture, I circled it in red over here on the one side. That is a picture of her with her doll, and with her doll, Mary Katherine, in the buggy. And it shows all the various types of travel that she might go on at that time. So again, this is great when you're trying to teach the history of travel for Northern Kentucky in the 1880s. We have the trains, the steamboats, we've got horse and buggy, horse and carriage, wagons, bicycles, even the tandem bike there is great. The horse-drawn trolley car, streetcar, and then it looks like she's even including the electric streetcar in there as well. So, great, great details. Here is one that she does. I visit Sitting Bull, 1885. When I was about 7 or 8, Mama and I visited Sitting Bull. He was a prisoner on a reservation somewhere in Kansas. I thought he looked very sad and wondered if it was because he was sitting all the time. It seemed to me if he changed his name to Running Bull, he might have had a better time and maybe even escaped. So here we get the musings of what she remembers thinking as a child. And, what little 7 or 8-year-old isn't going to think something like that. So, and again, she's painting the details of what she remembers seeing. And if it's as accurate as her other pieces, then we really get a good view of what she remembers seeing. The little papoose on the lady's back, the animals. So, how much of this was super accurate, how much of it was either imagination or what she thinks she remembers, I don't know. Here's her first pony that Grandpa had given her, and she named the pony Darling. And in her words, the first day I rode him, he threw me. I still thought he was darling. After a period of time and many lumps of sugar, he thought I was too, and he never threw me again. So again, these musings of what she remembers as a child. And I love how the chickens are nearly as big as the pigs, or that chicken in the front, how big, it's almost as big as maybe is that a dog or a sheep over to the side there. So, but again, she's showing some of the animals that would have been around. Maybe there's a goat there in the front as well. So, and of course, she's writing it in a dress. Here we have the image of a circus. Again, I circled where Mary Bruce and her grandfather are seated back there and pictured. Talks about how they always sat in the front row, ate peanuts, drank lemonade. I met Tom Thumb and his wife too. They were even smaller than I was. So these are great things that that she's bringing up. Looks like Wild Bill Cody perhaps here. So you can see a lot of what the circus performers would have been like, or what she might have seen at the time. And then of course the sleigh, Christmas in Kentucky. And here we have in the center, the snowman, people shoveling their walks. Looks like it was here in Cincinnati and Covington a few weeks ago. Times don't change too much, do they? Okay, here's one called My Father's House in Washington, Kentucky. I remember her father, his name was, I always forget it, Richard Lashbrook Green. Richard Lashbrook Green was her father, and he was only 25 when he died. And like I said, she was only a year old, so she doesn't really know anything about him, but her mother did allow her to get to know his family. So here we have a memory of her visiting with her mother and her grandfather, visiting her father's family. Then there's a little cousin there. We see how they traveled. We're seeing the details of the bricks, the panes and the windows, even the details on the curtains. And we see Colonel Henry Bruce is often depicted in his white suit, which is always great. When school kids see these paintings, they want to know if he's Colonel Sanders, which always gives me quite a laugh. Here's another one from her book. It shows her room at Grandma Green's. And she has her doll, Mary Katherine. And I love this part. She was French with a kid body and a bisque head. We wore matching outfits. They were made for us by Madame Leone, Mama's French dressmaker in New York. I always thought Madame Leone and Mary Katherine had a special affinity because they both came from Paris. When Mary Katherine traveled with me, she had a little trunk for her clothes that was just like mine. I made tickets for her when we went on the train, and the conductor punched them just like a grown-up's. So I can just picture this little Mary sitting there with her tickets, holding it out for the conductor to punch. But look at the details in this room, the details of the quilt on the bed, the floor rugs, the ornate furniture, the canopy bed. It's just amazing details of the time. And here we have her depicting my first visit to the Kentucky Derby. And here we have her watching the Derby in the center area. A cousin had a horse running, and that horse decided he did not want to run and sat down on the track. She bursts out crying because she's so sad that the horse won't get up, but the grown-ups just had another mint julep. Mary Bruce Sharon is quite the celebrity at this point. Here she is with President Dwight Eisenhower. They have some of her works in the Eisenhower collection. Some of her works are in the Herbert Humphrey family collection, the Cincinnati Art Museum, and of course, Behringer-Crawford Museum has 12 of her pieces. And there are other places that have pieces, and there are private owners who do have her works. So she became quite well known. She had a spread done of her in Life magazine at one point. So, she made it and didn't really start pursuing that lifestyle until 71 years old. Let's see here. So there you see a picture of her with many of her pieces. This one right here back behind her is called Grandma Reading Me a Story, and that is part of the Behringer-Crawford Museum collection. We also, the maypole here is part of our collection. So we hope you come out sometime to see some of her pieces. This little one down here on the floor I really love. I don't have a larger picture of it to show you, but she's in her bedroom. You can see out the windows, see the details. You can see her little stove that she has, and she says it actually works, that she would actually cook food on this little tiny kid's stove and have little tea parties and such, and Grandpa would come in and have tea with her. So so that was her life. So we'll see if there's any questions. I'm going to turn my screen share off here. Okay.
Okay, so first, before we get to questions, we do want to go over the trivia question that we had. So our question tonight was, what is the Covington address where Mary Bruce Sharon grew up with her grandfather? And the answer was 622 Sandford Street. And our winner was Betty Brockhoff. So congratulations, Betty. So we have had a couple questions submitted in the chat. Our first one is from Peter Neroni. Was he referring to her grandfather, I guess? Was he a Kentucky colonel, or did he actually earn that title by serving in the military?
Oh, good question. I'm trying to think back. I want to say he was a Kentucky colonel, but I'm not 100% sure if he served or not. Sorry about that. I'd have to look that up. I don't recall if he served in the military or not.
Okay. And then our
Sorry.
other and then our other question is from Janine Kreinbrink. Are all 150 works accounted for?
That's a really good question, Janine. I don't know. I don't know. We have the 12. I know we know of quite a few other ones. Is there a comprehensive list somewhere? I have no idea. When I've researched her works, I've never found anything that I could easily find anywhere that has all of them listed. I do know that the Northern Kentucky NKU has a lot of the Bruce family papers, and although it's not one of the 150 pieces, I did find references that they have some pencil drawings of hers from earlier on in her life. Like I said, those aren't part of the 150, but I couldn't find anything digitized that I could see. But there are other pieces of her work out there, but I really don't know if they're all accounted for or not.
Lori Risch, our executive director, has also said she doesn't know of any complete works, so any complete inventory.
Thanks, Lori.
If anybody else has any questions, please put them in the chat. You can also turn your mic on and ask if you would like. If no one has any right now, maybe you could, if you want.
Okay, I can say so. One thing that I love about Mary Bruce Sharon is that her work, is called primitive. It's a type of folk art. It's very simple or naive, as they call all of it, but it details what happens during a particular time. And how cool would it be for you to sit down? Don't worry about what your artistic talent is, but sit down and maybe do some drawings or paintings of what you remember, a great memory from your childhood. What it looked like at Christmas time, or what it looked like at a family get together, or whatever, and paint that and then write about it on there. Have that pictorial and oral history for your family that you can pass on, and maybe your great grandchildren will see it, and how much cooler than a photograph would that be for them? So this isn't just something that you do if you're an artist. Take that chance. Who cares?
What was the most surprising thing you learned while researching Mary Bruce Sharon?
Well, I think the most surprising thing was not necessarily about her, because I knew that, she's from here. She only lived here a little bit, but all of her artwork is centered on her time living here. So Covington really made a big impression on her. That's what her focus is of her works. But I think the biggest surprise I had was how connected with the Confederacy her family was. Not necessarily her, she wasn't, but her grandfather. And that her great grandfather, Henry Bruce's father, actually owned something like 40 or 50 slaves. So throughout his life. So I was very surprised by that. But by the time Mary Bruce Sharon was around, thankfully slavery was abolished, and so she did not have those leanings, but that part of her family surprised me. You don't think about it as being that close to Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky as having that.
If anybody else has any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We probably have time for a couple more. From Janet Roy, is she connected with Brucewood Presbyterian Church?
I don't know. Sorry. guys are coming up with great questions. I do not know. I did not, there isn't a whole lot that I could find on her personal life when I've done research on Mary Bruce, other than her connection with her grandfather as a child, because that's what she's painting. But other than that, there isn't a whole lot of details about that personal life out there. I don't know if it's because she was 71 when she started painting, and into, you know, her late 70s when she's starting to gain popularity, that it just didn't matter to people or what, I'm not sure. But there isn't a whole lot out there.
If anybody else, obviously put them in the chat. We do have time for another one or so. But until then, maybe what was the most challenging part of your research? Was it trying to find things about her personal life?
Yeah, I think so. You can go down a lot of rabbit holes, because when you start looking her up and then trying to make connections with other people in her family, they had really big families back then. And then if you start getting into the Bruce papers, I was only getting more of the abstracts, and you could get like just the summary of what was in all of them, but they had some convoluted stuff going on. I mean, and they would send letters back and forth to everyone. You know, we have phone conversations now. They didn't. They had to write letters. So even when you're just talking about things that you're going to be buying, or detailing someone's illness or whatever, those types of things are all there. So you can find out so much from these letters that are archived there. But one thing I did want to mention was, I had said earlier that most of her works were done with gouache, and I wanted to explain what that was a little bit. Gouache is a type of water-based paint, very similar to an acrylic or a watercolor, and she actually uses it with watercolors. Oftentimes, at least, well, pre-computer, graphic designers would use gouache all the time because it's the purest form of a pigment, and you can get the purest form of that color, and which is awesome. And she painted these, and she paints a lot of them on cardboard, which really wasn't the greatest for archival purposes. But the biggest problem with gouache, even though it's this great color, is that it does fade in light. So that is one reason why you will only see a few of her pieces on exhibit at the museum, unless we're holding a special exhibit, because it's just dangerous. And actually, Henri Matisse, when he did his paper cutouts, he used gouache, and those are actually only on display a couple hours a day, a couple days a week, in the Smithsonian. So you have to be very careful to keep it out of direct sunlight, because it is so easily fades so easily.
Maybe if you want to talk about which piece that you've come across, maybe that the museum has or doesn't have, that is your favorite of hers.
Well, I think there is one where she, it's called My Maypole Party. It is owned by the museum. I really like this one. It's an outdoor scene. We have this big white colonial house and gazebo. There's children dancing around a maypole. It's just really fun. You see the people outside. There's dogs. You're even seeing, like, I think it's a croquet set or something like that. Games that they might play outside. And it just seems like a lot of fun. You know, it's spring, they want to get outside, summer's getting ready to start, and it just really shows that some fun that they would have. But I do also really like the way she does her interior scenes, really getting that detail out. And I just find that fascinating, that you can see what it was like in the 1800s just by looking at her paintings, the detailing in the rugs or wallpaper or the carpets. It's a lot like Mary Cassatt did. So it's really cool.
Have you learned anything about Covington from her paintings that maybe you didn't know prior to seeing them?
Well, prior to seeing them, I didn't know her grandfather snuck away in the night on a horse to avoid being arrested by the Union soldiers. So that was something different. And just finding the connection that he had with the Roebling suspension bridge being built. So that's kind of cool.
Okay. If anybody has any more questions, we probably have time for one more. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. So if somebody wants to turn their mic on really quick and ask a question, go ahead. Okay. Other than that, we'd like to let you know that our new exhibits at BCM, Spirit Riders, Abracadabra, a Harlan Hubbard exhibit, as well as a Who Dey history exhibit, are all now on display through April 24th. Tomorrow on Channel 12, our curator, Jason French, will be talking about that Who Dey history exhibit. So tune in to watch that. And also, BCM is doing a program for seniors at the Barrington related to Mary Bruce Sharon, and they are doing senior art activities. You can find out more about any of these exhibits on our website, bcmuseum.org. So that's all we have for tonight. We'd like to thank our sponsors and supporters of BCM, as well as the staff, trustees, and members of the Behringer-Crawford Museum. For more Northern Kentucky history through the week, you can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, where you can find the latest installment of our Curators Chat with our Curator of Collections, Jason French. Please like and subscribe to those videos. And there will not be a Northern Kentucky History Hour next week as we continue our bi-weekly schedule, but we will be back on March 9th with Hillary Delaney of the Boone County Public Library on the Little Britain Carriage House. So until then, take care, everyone.
Sorry, Heather. I'm just going to plug our art exhibits right now real fast that Heather mentioned, Abracadabra, and the artist was a former director, Greg Harper, former director of the Behringer-Crawford Museum, and his wife's exhibit is the Spirit Guides, Mamie Bradford. And some of Greg Harper's pieces are actually interactive, where he wants you to touch and move some things in it, and they're really fun. So you really need to come out and see them. And we also have a really big exhibit of our Harlan Hubbard still up, where there are some pieces that we've never before exhibited. So you really got to come out to see the stuff. It's great.
And while you stop by BCM to see these new exhibits, you can also see some of our Mary Bruce Sharon pieces that were just shown in the presentation.
Definitely.
So until then, everyone, take care and good night. Thank you for joining us. See you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.